Hello and welcome to another video. It's going to be about heart rate training zones, brief touch into a little bit of the science behind it. So I got a lot of questions in my last video about heart rate training zone. And I figured I'd make a video to dive into that a little bit. I do a fair bit of talking about heart rate zones. And I was in zone 3 when I looked down at my watch, so even though I'm in zone 2. My heart rate has stayed the same, but my pace has slowed. My heart rate is 156. It's been there for about 2 hours. It's still my zone 2. Base training for the win. My heart rate was at 170. The weight took us down to zone 2. Can't keep it down. I've been in zone 4 for the last 30 minutes almost. I'm in zone 2. I'm at VO2 max right now. So I figured I'd do a video summarizing what they are and giving a little bit of insight as to what I mean when I talk about different zones. And they also drop terms like aerobic threshold or aerobic capacity or anaerobic threshold. I mentioned lactate threshold, things like that. So this video will give a little bit of insight to that and put all of our terminology on one page. There's a little bit of wind today, so you'll have to excuse the background noise, but at least I have a beautiful backdrop. So we'll start by defining heart rate zones as a set of heart rate ranges that correspond to specific physiological responses to a power output that we're generating. These heart rate ranges are very personal and they need to be anchored in some sort of metabolic events that's specific to our physiology to have real meaning and help inform our training. In this video, we will go over the different events and transitions in our metabolism that help define these zones, and thus we'll be on the same page when we're talking about what these zones mean and what happens at these transitions. It's important for us to keep in mind that these training intensity zones are already an artificial construct, but they can be a valuable tool to help frame our training. So, to make them as useful as possible, we need to base them in our personal physiology. Another thing that we need to keep in mind when we talk about these training zones is that they vary day to day and they're dependent on our level of fatigue and our current fitness. As such, trying to define these zones within a range of 1 or 2 beats is giving us false precision. Generally, we should give ourselves about a 5 beat per minute bucket, plus or minus, around the transitions between these zones. They're not hard, fast rules, and it depends on how you feel on that day. Let's actually get into what these zones are. So a traditional method for getting intensity zones is to use your maximum heart rate, which is determined by an age-related formula. There are many online calculators for determining these zones based on this formula. This is very arbitrary and has little connection to our personal physiology. We need something that's anchored in our actual metabolic events and physiology, and that is the first step to making a meaningful system for us personally, and we can use that to guide our training moving forward. So the system I'm going to be describing here is a 5-zone system. There's 4-zone systems, various other systems with many subzones. It just depends on what you're looking for. But in general, the 5-zone system is the most basic and standard. Garmin uses a 5-zone system on their watches, and I know other activity trackers do as well. So I'm going to name the zones so we're all on the same page. We'll call zone 1 recovery, zone 2 aerobic capacity, zone 3 anaerobic threshold, zone 4 aerobic power, and zone 5 we'll call VO2 max or sprints. So let's begin by talking about zone 1 and zone 2, the easiest of our zones. The recovery and aerobic capacity zones can be maintained on a scale to many hours. These zones metabolize fat as the body's fuel source almost exclusively. The metabolic process that's used to convert fats into ATP or usable cellular energy is out of the scope of this video, but I will say that activities at these speeds and power outputs can be carried out by slow twitch muscle fibers. These slow twitch muscle fibers are naturally endowed with a large number of mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, and are very efficient at providing cellular energy at a slow but sustainable rate. The key takeaway from this is that the metabolism of fats inside of these slow twitch muscle fibers does not produce lactic acid. That's the compound that gives you the burning sensation during a hard effort. As such, these zones feel relatively easy, have no burning sensation associated with them, and can be continued for very long duration. The human body can store an amazing amount, tens of thousands of calories, in the form of fat, even on the leanest elite athletes. So, this recovery and aerobic capacity zone are our endurance zones. This is the zone that we work in for our long outings, in the mountains, on trail, on road. Anything lasting over 2 hours, we need to be working in these zones for it to be sustainable. Personally, it's in these two zones where I spend about 80% of my training load. Oh, there's a chipmunk over there. So I wouldn't have got that inside doing a voiceover. As we increase the workout intensity, there comes a point where our metabolism transitions from using only fats and only our slow twitch muscle fibers into starting to metabolize some carbohydrates to have a little bit of a higher power output and keep up with our energy requirements. At this point, we start recruiting some fast twitch muscle fibers. These fast twitch muscle fibers are very good at creating large amounts of energy very quickly, but they can't sustain that for a long period of time. That's the point when we're in zone 3. I like to think of this zone as a muscular endurance zone. So when we cross the aerobic threshold, this is the point at which we are producing so much power that our mitochondria can no longer keep up with the energy demands. So our metabolism begins to include some anaerobic respiration. This metabolic process bypasses the already busy mitochondria and utilizes carbohydrates as the fuel source. Our bodies are not very well adapted for storing energy in the form of carbohydrates. At a given time, we can only store an hour or two worth of energy in the form of carbohydrates in our muscles. These are stored in the form of glycogen. On top of the fact that we can't store a lot of energy in the form of carbohydrates, when we have these high energy demands and we're forced to metabolize the carbohydrates at a faster rate, we end up using a metabolic pathway that generates acid, lactic acid, as a byproduct and a trade-off of this quicker energy production. This is when you start to feel the burning sensation. That's lactic acid building up in your muscles. Due to the fact that the majority of the energy is still being supplied by a sustainable aerobic pathway being produced by fats, this intensity level can be carried out on the scale of a few hours, maybe 1 to 2 depending on your training. The next stage, zone 4, occurs when the energy demands become even higher, and now you need to start recruiting a lot more fast twitch muscle fibers. Excuse me. Zone 4 is the next stage as we step up through our heart rate. In zone 4, at our aerobic threshold, the energy demands are even higher than they were previously, and as such, we need to recruit even more fast twitch muscle fibers. These fibers, again, are very good at making large amounts of energy very quickly, but it is not a sustainable means of generating cellular energy. In this zone, fatigue sets in very quickly. At the heart rate that corresponds to your transition from zone 3 into zone 4, a lot of fitness trackers will call this area on the low end of zone 4 tempo. When you're working in this tempo range, you can only maintain that speed and that heart rate for a maximum of around 30 minutes. Once you reach around that 30-minute barrier, you're forced to slow down. Running at this high tempo, which is why they call it a tempo run, causes a large buildup in lactic acid and a large amount of muscular fatigue. This forces you to slow down. On top of that, there's also the neurological factor. Your neurological system is under a huge amount of stress and consuming a great amount of resources to try to keep those motor neurons firing at this high rate. As such, it creates a large amount of stress and vastly increases your training load, even for a short 30-minute duration. A true maximal aerobic threshold can only be maintained for the scale of a few minutes. Working at this intensity increases your tolerance to having lactate in your muscles and works on your body's ability to keep shuttling that lactate out of your muscles. This is a very hard workout. At this level, you're breathing hard, you're almost at the cusp of feeling like you can't get enough air, and you can only maintain this for a few minutes. At the top end of zone 4, you can only maintain that heart rate for about 8 minutes. It's very easy to become overtrained working at this high intensity. Personally, at my current stage of training, I'm only working in zone 4 once every 7 to 10 days. Now we move on to zone 5, the highest of our zones in our 5-zone system. When you're in zone 5, your heart rate is so high that fatigue kicks in almost immediately. Almost immediately you're feeling lactic acid burn. You're almost immediately feeling that need to slow down and that you can't maintain that pace for any longer. The bottom of zone 5 can only be held on the scale of a minute or 2, and the top of this intensity zone, full out sprints, can really only be maintained for about 6 to 8 seconds. Lactic acid buildup is quick and you are forced to slow down almost immediately. Heart rate trackers and monitors are not very effective of tracking activities at this heart rate level, just because it's such a transient, quick response, jumping up to a high heart rate and then maintaining that and slowly dropping off as you recover. The energy demands are incredibly high, your leg turnover is incredibly fast, it creates a large amount of neurological stress, a large amount of physiological stress in terms of lactic acid buildup and muscle fatigue, and it just can't be maintained for very long. So I do these workouts maybe once every 2 weeks, depending on how I'm feeling and what's going on with my training. But I spend very little time in zone 5. If you're working in zone 5, the intervals are forced to be very short, and you need large amounts of recovery, 3 to 5 minutes in between intervals. Now that we've talked a little bit about what these zones are, we have to talk about how we can actually give them physiological meaning so that we can use them to properly inform our training. So we're going to use 2 physiological anchor points to set up our heart rate zones. The first is the aerobic threshold, and the second is the anaerobic threshold. The anaerobic threshold is often just referred to as the threshold and is a tool that's used in many watches, built-in lactic acid tests, lactate threshold tests, lactate tests. There's many different names for it. It can be very confusing, but they all mean the same thing. Our aerobic threshold will give us the top end of our zone 2, and our anaerobic threshold will give us the top end of our zone 4. And we can use that to anchor in our own physiology our heart rate zones and use them to inform our training. We can determine both of these thresholds by conducting tests on ourselves. Namely, we can use the heart rate drift test for our aerobic threshold, and we can use a lactate test or threshold test to determine our lactate threshold. The difference between zone 1 and zone 2 is kind of arbitrary, and it's not easy to define. It's a distinction that depends a great deal on our individual fitness and how we're feeling that day. A safe rule of thumb for setting zone 1 is a limit of 15% below our zone 2. Zone 3 is simply the zone bound between the upper end of zone 2 and the lower end of zone 4, which is our anaerobic threshold. Zone 5 is the heart rate at which we can only maintain that output for about 1 to 2 minutes. Now that we know a little bit about the different training zones, we can use it to inform our training. But to do this, we need to establish these zones based on our own physiology. So, in my next video, I will be documenting both running my own heart rate drift test and my lactic acid test. Then we can set up my heart rate zones, and you can do the same. Until then, I hope you found this video interesting and you learned something new. Hopefully it helps explain some of the terms I've used in my previous videos and will keep us all on the same page going forward. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.